Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Cutting Costs. Here's how Avalara can help. My name is Caitlin, and I am so excited to be your host for today. Today is all about the resounding theme lately, which has been staffing changes, cut budget. So today we're going to be covering how Avalara customers can gain efficiency by one, automating manual error-prone processes and outsourcing or bringing certain functions back in-house. Now, before we dive in, if you've joined us for a webinar before, I have to do my housekeeping. First one is a disclaimer. You all know this, but please note Avalara cannot provide legal tax advice. We are going to answer your questions as best as we can, but this is a warm reminder. And then our safe harbor statement. So on your screen right now is our safe harbor policy. Please take a moment to review this as I go over some other housekeeping items. First one is we are recording today's event. So if you want to listen to it again or share with a colleague, the recording will be available in about 24 hours and emailed to the email inbox that you registered with. The console that you're looking at can be customized, so feel free to move, resize any of those windows. You can actually resize your windows by dragging the bottom right-hand corner or by just dragging and dropping the windows to different places in your screen. It's pretty flexible, it's pretty malleable. All right, so the additional resources section is what I'm going to be covering next. So the additional resources section contains related resources, including today's slide deck. So if you're like, I want a copy of this PowerPoint, go ahead, go to the additional resources section and download it now. If there's any you'd like to check out, I highly recommend just clicking on them now. They'll open up in a new tab and be waiting for you. When we close this webinar, the entire console and all those resources close with us. But if you open it now, it'll still be waiting in another tab in your browser. So if there's any you'd like to check out, I always say play it safe and click on them now. If you have any questions, please use the Ask a Question box. We have some time set aside at the end of the webinar for a live Q&A. This is also where you can submit some troubleshooting questions about your console or your platform. We have people on the back end ready to answer those questions. All right, so this next one is hiding. It's our group chat. But down at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a bar with a bunch of different icons. If you click the one that has 2 chat bubbles, that is going to open our group chat. This is your chance to talk to other fellow Avalara customers. You have a question about your connector. You have a question about your industry. Pop it in there. Chat with others. This is a great little 1 hour long community that you can have with other Avalara customers. So highly recommend. Click that icon with 2 chat bubbles. That'll open up our chat. All right, we are still virtual. So if you have any technical questions, there is a question mark icon down at the bottom of your screen, or you can reach out using the Ask a Question box. So this is my favorite part. I love talking about Crush. If you saw the video at the top of the hour, you saw that we are back in person. This is so exciting. And this year, Crush, our signature conference, is regional. They're more accessible, they are free, and they're smaller and intimate. So you have plenty of time and resources to ask your questions, talk to experts one-on-one, meet other people in your region, in your industry. Can't recommend them enough. We are headed to Houston next. So we've already done Denver. We're headed to Houston actually next week in 9 days. So meet us in Texas. If you're in the Texas area, we hope you'll reach out. We hope you'll come and join us. We're also, after Texas, heading to Atlanta, and then we're going to make our way up the coast. So then we go to Boston, then we're going to London, then we're going to head to Chicago, then San Diego, then San Jose. And the content will be slightly similar, but I would say that a lot of the keynote and spotlight session content will change as it does throughout the year. So we'll talk about different trends and updates throughout the year. So If you don't want to go to the one in Boston, you want to go to San Diego, you can. Feel free to pick and choose the city that you want. We can't wait to see you on the road. AvaTax.com. Go check it out. All right, I know you all are itching for that CPE credit. So today we are offering one CPE credit for today's presentation. For those looking to receive that CPE credit today, we're going to ask you to respond to 3 of our 4 poll questions. So the poll questions are going to pop up on your screen for a limited amount of time. So please make sure you're ready to answer. It's about 60 seconds that you have to answer those questions. Please do not split or tile your screens because we found that that can actually affect the placement of your poll question. So when these poll questions pop up, I'm going to be coming back on. So when you hear my voice, it's time to answer a poll question. Also, you must attend for the full 60-minute duration. There's a timer. If you're looking at your screen, there's a timer. So those are the 2 things we look at, the poll questions and the timer. Once you have met the CPE requirements, your certificate will be able to download in the Earn Certification box. So when you reach both that poll question and that timer qualification, an icon is going to pop up and says, congratulations, you earned 1 CPE credit. Click the icon, it'll open up a new tab and you can download it from there. Your certificate will also be sent via the post-event email. So you miss it, you got to jump, you got to go to a meeting. Don't worry, if you reach those qualifications, it will be in tomorrow's email as well. One note, we are unable to provide CPE credit to those that have technology issues that prevent them from qualifying. So if you do have any technology issues, let us know via the Ask a Question box. We're going to try and troubleshoot those and fix those as quickly as possible to make sure you get your CPE credit. All right, so, and if you have a moment, I'm following my script here. If you have a moment, please respond to the survey questions at the end of the webinar. That's super helpful. Helps guide our webinars and how we can improve them. I have talked enough. I have talked for 8 minutes straight, so I need to bring on Raphael. Raphael, thank you so much for joining us. He's a senior executive at Avalara. I'm so excited to have you on as a speaker. Can you share with the audience a little bit more about yourself and your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I get started, Caitlin, I just want to know, when are we going to Hawaii for Crush? Because sign me up for that. I want to be a part of that. So if y'all are in the Texas area, yeah, if y'all are in the Texas area and do plan on attending or coming to the Houston event, I'm excited. I'm going to be there. I know Caitlin and a couple of other of our cohorts are going to be there as well. We'd love to meet you. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. So just a little bit about me. Been with Avalara now for a little over a year. Prior to my joining the good guys, if you will, I was with Thomson Reuters as a regional director, working both with tax and legal side of the house, and so have some pretty good background there. But I've been in the software space, in particular the automation space, for over 20 years. So the majority of my career, if you will, has been kind of dedicated to this. And then just a couple of quick facts about me, if you can't tell already from the background. I'm an avid outdoorsman, love spending time outdoors along with my 2 little girls, 12-year-old and a 10-year-old. And my youngest caught that fish when she was 3, which was really cute because it was bigger than her. But anyways, that's a little bit about me. Thank you so much for having me here, and I appreciate you letting me be a part of this.
I love it, Raphael. And we're actually going to jump straight into our first poll question, everybody. So this is our first CPE poll question. What is a top concern for your company in 2023? I mean, what a year already. So I have moved the poll question to your screen right now. So A, reduced or flat headcount. B, reduced budget. C, managing disparate tech systems. 3 options for you, A, B, or C. Go ahead and click on your response right now. Raphael, I mean, just a few seconds here. What's been, from your conversations with different customers, what have you been hearing as a top concern?
Yeah, I mean, it's all 3 are great options, right? Because we hear them on a daily basis. But it really is kind of and I'm curious to see what the responses are going to be from the audience. But it's really kind of a head-to-head between A and B, right? Reduced headcount and have so many different hats that I'm wearing. How do I manage this entire process? Or, hey, budgets have been cut, or we need to figure out a more streamlined way to do this and be able to afford it. So that's what I have seen recently. But like I said, I'm curious to see what the audience comes back with.
Definitely. It's interesting to see how it changes year over year, right? 2 years ago, we
Yeah.
were doing a webinar on rapid growth, and everyone was like, "I'm going online, and I need to understand compliance online and Nexus and all this stuff." And now the times have changed. The year is evolving and shaping up to be a little bit different, and so I'm really glad we're tackling this topic.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a quick look at the results. All right,
Wow.
so a little bit across the board, but probably C is the winner.
Yeah. Managing technology systems. Yeah, that's interesting. For sure. And we'll talk a little bit about that today, right? And kind of go in and dive into that and what that means. But it's interesting that came out to be the majority, because that was one of the things that I always harp on when I talk to customers is managing those systems can be difficult, right? And not only that, but incredibly time consuming. So how do you make the best use of that? So that's actually perfect for our call.
All right, I'll let you take it here on the agenda slide.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you again, Caitlin. And for those of y'all that have just joined or have been listening to us since the beginning, I just wanted to say thank you again for jumping on. Hope you guys have an opportunity to get something out of our this webinar and this conversation. And if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate. Ask them on the Q&A, and we'll try and address them as much as possible. If not, when we get to the end. But as Caitlin mentioned, today's presentation is really all about cutting costs. And what we're going to kind of look at this from a multi-step process, right? So we're going to understand what some of the challenges are that you guys are facing with today, really define those challenges and kind of break them down a little bit further. We're going to talk about some tips on how to tackle those. What are some ways that ultimately we can take some of that burden off your shoulders? And then last but not least, kind of wrap it up with what are different ways that we can help. So as we dive into this slide is actually pretty daunting. And one of the things that I wanted to say and make sure that everyone kind of understood is, look, indirect tax, which is really what we're talking about today, right? Indirect tax or sales and use tax, or however you want to phrase it, it's an absolute beast. The rules are constantly changing. Jurisdictional updates are constantly happening. Borders and lines are constantly evolving. And that's outside of your control. Then you have what the business is actually doing, right? And keeping up with the products, whether it's increasing or decreasing. What does that mean from a taxability standpoint? It can really become maddening to even think about. And so you're not alone. Just know that there's a lot of other folks out here that are dealing with the same issues. And we're going to dive into this in a lot more detail. But similar to the first question that Caitlin asked a couple moments ago, we did a poll off of our clientele last year, just trying to identify what some of those challenges are that they're dealing with. And it really kind of came up to three main areas of concern. The first one is keeping up with the changing landscape, right? Whether it be legislative changes and what that means, whether it be Nexus, right? And do you have to keep an eye on a certain state or a certain Nexus requirement and file returns or register or whatever the case may be? And we'll talk about that, since that was such a big area of concern that a lot of tax managers and tax directors had. But the second area that we'll cover as well is, look, we understand that we've got this responsibility, but are we correctly placing the appropriate tax with those transactions? And then at the same time, are we filing correctly? What does that look like, and what does that mean? And that's something that keeps folks up late at night. And then last but not least, we'll kind of dive into this as well. Digitization, if I said that correctly, digitalization of tax, right? What that looks like, what that means. And that kind of goes back to the original question a couple moments ago that you guys all chose, keeping up with different systems, right? We'll talk about all of that, the complexities in what you guys have to deal with. But as we get into this and understanding these difficulties more, it's important that we understand there's a couple different things that are ultimately driving this. First and foremost, and you'll hear me say this throughout the course of the presentation, but the burden that you guys have to deal with. The burden of understanding, again, what is my physical or remote presence, and what does that mean to me? The burden of having to abide by my state requirements, even if I'm not physically located in that state. Do I have a threshold? What does that threshold look like? And what does that ultimately mean from a filing perspective? And then last but not least, as we found out when COVID hit a couple years back, online marketplaces or online environments and online sales, how does that change my existing landscape, and what does that look like? And so as we dig into this, we'll dig into all of these a little bit more detail. But we'll start with the nexus threshold. And look, I think for the most part, everyone really kind of understands what nexus means, right? But just a quick little refresher for those of y'all that might not be terribly familiar. To claim that you have nexus in a particular location or particular state, it means that you either have to have an employee, a physical presence, or a warehouse in that state and need to register with that state, so that way you can collect and remit sales and use tax. If you're just selling in that state, then you have to cross a certain threshold that the state demands for you to be able to, again, report or file in that state and require that. This is a great representation, and I love this slide because it breaks it down into really 4 different colors, right? The easiest one, the reason why I didn't say 5, is because if you look at the gray, there's no economic nexus laws that are required in those states, right? For obvious reasons. But as you look at the 4 different colors, it kind of gives you a quick glance into what each one of these states requires of you, and what are some things that you need to keep an eye of when you're doing business in these states. Some of these are as little as $100,000 if you, even if you're not in that state, but you're selling to someone in a different state, and that those transaction counts cross that 100,000 barrier. It's your responsibility to file on those returns, and so it's incredibly important that this is paid attention to. But even a step further, if you are selling in a marketplace kind of environment. Now, when I talk about marketplace, there's really a couple different ways that we can look at this, right? You've got the Shopify and the Etsy's of the world that have formed some amazing partnerships with Avalara, and that will take care of that process for you for the most part. I'm not necessarily talking about those, right? What I'm talking about is any other type of marketplace environment, whether it's a marketplace environment that you've created or that you're just selling online with something that is home built, whatever the case may be. These requirements are different at the same time, right? So again, I love this slide because it's broken out into a couple of quick colors that make a quick distinction into what your obligations are. And the nice thing about this is you'll get this presentation at the end of the webinar. So you're more than welcome to go back in and take a look at this and take a little bit of a deeper dive. But the ones that could quite possibly be the most troublesome are the ones that are in gray, right? No guidance provided by the state. So based on what you're doing, based on the future of what you plan on doing in those particular states, those 4 states in particular that are in gray, you're going to need to dive in a little bit deeper and truly get an understanding of what that means to you, okay? So now I'm going to pass it back over to Caitlin. She's got another quick question for you guys, and then we'll pick right back up.
Thank you so much. So here's our second CPE poll question. So what is your company size? Pretty simple question. Helps us get a better idea of the size of the issues you might be facing, and can help Raphael direct his presentation a bit more customized towards the people in the audience. So A, micro, B, small, C, mid-market, or D, enterprise. So take a few seconds. If you've jumped to another tab, come on back. And this is our second out of 4 CPE poll questions. Rafael, you probably work with businesses of all sizes, right? Do
Yes.
you feel like there's one, enterprise might have a larger footprint in terms of their nexus liability, but do you find that there is one company size that just faces more qualms, troubles, and complications than another?
No, I don't. It's the answer to that is the complications just get bigger the bigger the company is.
Yeah.
Right. And what's interesting is we talk about this quite often in our team, that nexus conversations typically aren't that big of a talking point when you're talking about some of these larger enterprise companies. But there's so many different systems that are involved and different selling avenues that they're engaged with, that nexus still comes up. Like when we do account reviews with customers, there's quite often that we look at nexus requirements that they have coming up that they weren't even aware of. And so
Yeah.
it's still a topic of conversation regardless of where you're at, and ensuring that you get those taxes right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All righty. Now we are going to thank you so much for those results. Rafael, I believe you can see the results on the back end.
Yes. Yep. No worries. No worries. We'll jump right into it. Thanks again for doing that and answering that question. So we talked a little bit about kind of some of the different challenges that you guys are facing with today. Now we're going to jump into returns, right? And what does that look like? This kind of goes back to the original answer that you guys gave at the beginning of this webinar, which is really kind of figuring out the systems, right? Aggregating tax data is a conversation I have on a daily basis, regardless of the size of the company, regardless of the customer. It's a challenge that is constantly being dealt with today. And the reason why is there's multiple systems, right? And look, whether you have one ERP or 10 ERPs, which is quite common, believe it or not, whether you're dealing with a point of sale system, e-commerce, it doesn't matter what the source systems are that are allowing you to facilitate that business. Having that visibility and having that report, if you will, being consolidated and put into one overall location that will allow you as a tax manager or as a tax team to be able to digest it and break it down for your reporting purposes back to the state is critical. And quite frankly, this is always one of the most troubling areas, is how do I, with so many systems in place, how can I capture that information and then be able to decipher what it's actually telling me? And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. But as we continue to kind of head down this path, look, just like the burden that you guys have and that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis with the actual transactions themselves, right? Making sure that you're not crossing any of those thresholds, or that you've met those nexus requirements and that you're handling that. Filing those returns is, again, very similar in essence, where it's an additional burden that gets put on the team. From different states or local jurisdictions have many different forms that are constantly being updated, right? How do you know that you have the correct form? How do you know that the data that you're putting on it is accurate? Filing those returns, some states are still requiring a paper filing method, where others are requiring that you do it online, or a combination of both. And then more importantly, keeping that historical record. You have to, but where is that information being stored? It's impossible to, well, it's nearly impossible to collect all the data that you have from all the different source systems that you're using. And you've now filed that return and you filed it with the state and you've made that payment, but where are you storing that information in case of an audit to go back and quickly access? And again, it's just one more thing that's keeping you up at night. But what a lot of people don't consider when they think about indirect taxes is the third group of this, right? Which are exemption certificates. And in most cases, exemption certificates are looked at as something that's simplistic in nature. And you're not, that wouldn't be wrong if that was you. Exemption certificates as a whole are just that. They're pieces of paper that provide information about the buyer that exempts them from the sale that you have to store so that way you can report against it in case of an audit. Pretty simple, right? Nothing crazy there. But what is not simple is how that information is collected, how it's stored, and how you're utilizing, right? So one of the things that we hear quite often from our clientele and our accounts is that they find it incredibly difficult to actually collect that information. And think about it, right? An account manager or salesperson is working with a customer and they're trying to get through something really quick and get it to them and get it off their plate and move on. The last thing that they typically think about is, do I have an exemption certificate for this person if they claim that they're exempt? Is it valid? Is it accurate? And if I do need to find it, how do I ask for it, right? And so that often gets overlooked. The second thing is most of these employees are not trained to identify if this information on the certificate is accurate or not. I've heard from, I'll give you guys a good example. One of my customers said as they were going through and trying to clean their exemption certificates that they found information that was completely wrong. Someone had just either filled in incorrect information and made things up, or had just put a tax ID and didn't include anything else. Well, most of these employees that are trying to collect this information aren't trained into looking at what is exactly needed. Is it a certificate that's going to be valid when it comes to the state? And are they actually handling it correctly? Retrieval, that's another thing that we constantly hear about, right? And in particular, again, with COVID and a lot of businesses going online, is how do I create a sale online, a transaction or a purchase online, and if it is exempt, allow the customer to be able to provide that exemption certificate so that way we can track it and we can report against it. That is a major pain. And quite frankly, a lot of folks haven't figured out how to do that yet. And we're here to tell you that there are ways and we can help. And then last but not least, the collection of the certificates in general can be cumbersome, right? But if you don't have a trained eye looking at something and approving it and storing it in the right location, and God forbid you do go to an audit situation, not having that certificate to fall back on, if it's asked of you, could be incredibly expensive, right? It can be more expensive than actually paying and remitting payments for those returns. And so exemption certificates is pretty simplistic in nature, but it can really come back and bite you in the rear if it's not handled correctly. And so that plays such a major role or a key cog in the whole operation here. So let me pause there. I'll pass it back over to Caitlin. She's got one more quick question for you, and then we'll jump into what all this means.
That's right. So CVE poll question number 3, I'm going to move that to the screen right now. So how would you rate automation at your company? So A, excellent. We've automated every single thing that everything we can. B, very good. C, good. 50% manual, 50% automated. D, fair. E, poor. Nothing is automated. So we won't be releasing these responses, so feel free to answer honestly. Only we'll see it on the back end.
Yeah, and I think, Caitlin, I think it depends on who you ask, right? If you ask IT, it's probably excellent. If you ask director or CFOs or VPs, they're probably saying, it's pretty good. And then if you ask the ones that are dealing with it on a daily basis, they're probably sitting there saying, this stinks, man. It's all manual. But I'd be curious to see what the results are.
Definitely. All right, everybody, I'm going to give you maybe like 15 more seconds, and then we'll move on. to how Avalara can help. Go through some tips and some tricks. Alrighty, I'm gonna call it in 3, 2, 1. Raphael, you can see the results on the back end. So
Perfect.
we will go ahead and move along.
No, that's perfect. I appreciate it. So we've talked about all the different challenges, all the different burdens, all the things that are keeping you guys up at night, right? Or at your desk working when you could be at a kid's ball game or whatever it is that you guys have in your daily lives. Today, we're going to shift now we're going to shift that topic into what are some tips and tricks to help, right? We've talked about what that burden is. We've clearly defined from a calculation standpoint, from a filing the return standpoint, and we've also kind of highlighted the trifecta, which is the exemption certificates. What does that mean moving forward, and how can we help lessen that burden? So trick number 1, save money and time with sales tax automation, everyone's favorite topic. So sales tax automation at the end of the day, or from a very high level, is really just looking at it and saying, look, let's take that burden off of your shoulders and let's allow software and the software providers like Avalara to come in and say, let us handle this for you, okay? From defining and understanding what is that nexus that you're dealing with, and are you potentially going to be crossing any of those thresholds? That's an important part that, again, you don't have to sit there and scour over reports from multiple sourcing systems to get. We can provide that for you, or your system can. Registering in the particular state, or even overseas, right? Canada, Latin America, or even Europe, with the VAT requirements that are coming up and the constant evolution of that, which is a completely different webinar topic. But I think it's important to note for some of us here today, that can be understood, and that can be a catalyst for reaching out for help and actually meeting those requirements. To exemption certificate, which we talked a little bit about, but we'll get into much further. To filing those returns. At the end of the day, a tax automation software should be able to take all these concerns that you have and really kind of automate that process for you, okay? Now, when we talk about automation, what we're really talking about quite often that I hear from our clientele is, hey, we want to understand how Avalara can help from an automation standpoint. And the first question I ask is, why now, right? Because it's important for us to know that. And more often than not, it really kind of stems back from a couple different avenues. One, which none of us want, is a bad audit, right? We had an audit, it didn't come across all too favorable. And so we realized we've got some gaps in our automation and we want to try and solve that. Okay, perfect. Let's do that. The second that I see quite often is M&A activity. Right? In today's day and age, whether you're being bought or you're growing as a business, each department's going to have different ways of handling things. And so how do you mesh those into one and overall have a system that can handle all the above? And that's a pretty big driving factor. But also employment change, whether it be staffing changes, whether it be senior executive changes that come into place, those can also be a driver. But the thing that gets gets forgotten quite often is legislative changes. And the last big legislative change that we had, and you guys are probably very well aware of, is South Dakota versus Wayfair, right, back in 2018, where that changed the way indirect tax and indirect tax departments were handling how they manage their business. And while that was the biggest that has happened in recent years, that's not going to change. If we know anything, it's going to be that those legislative changes are going to continue to happen, right? If you are doing any business overseas and you deal with VAT and VAT reporting, e-invoicing is huge, right? You deal with it on a daily basis. And the countries that are adopting e-invoicing are more and more every single year. I think France and maybe a couple other countries have adopted it this year. But it's only a matter of time before that potentially comes to the States. And so, do you have a system in place that is not only handling the things and the burdens that you're dealing with now, but can adapt to the changes that are coming on top of that? So that's something that is imperative and something that really should be looked at. So how can Avalara help? Well, when we take a look at tax automation, we're really looking at this from a couple of different avenues. Excuse me, let me scroll back so I can make sure I get all of the bullet points here. Okay. So whether it be the tax change, and again, we've talked about this in ad nauseum throughout the previous slides, right? But whether it be the tax changes that are happening at your local level or the state level, whether it be the laws or the jurisdictional boundaries that are constantly evolving, the one thing most people don't typically take in consideration or think about until it becomes a massive fire drill are the specialties, right? And when I say specialties, what I'm talking about are any tax holidays, any product exemptions that come up, and how are those being handled? Throughout the course of my career, I can't tell you how many customers would call me at 4 o'clock on a Friday evening and say, "Holy cow, we didn't even think about that there's a tax holiday coming up. We need help," right? And they've engaged their IT teams, they've engaged all their departments, and now 20 people are trying to put out this massive fire that could have been handled or controlled if a true tax automation was in place. And so when you think about tax automation, it's not just the burden of the things that you're thinking about on a daily basis, but also what's coming up. And so that's why I wanted to pause on that for a second and just kind of bring that to everyone's attention. But we also hear quite often, okay, great, you talk about tax automation, but how does that work? And let's take kind of a deep dive into what that looks like. So you can see up here on the slide, it says ERP, but the truth of the matter is it can be a combination of any source system or all the source systems that you guys are using today, your point of sale, your marketplace environment, your ERP, whatever you're using today to create an invoice for a transaction that's going on within the business, okay? So just because it says ERP, just know that we're encompassing everything there. And when a transaction is going on, what I always tell my customers is, look, I'm not asking you to change anything that you have today, okay? I want you to continue using everything that you're doing today in the manner that you're accustomed to it. In turn, Avalara, or AvaTax in this particular instance, which is the tax engine, can connect back into those source systems to go through a series of checks. The first thing it's going to do is going to define the nexus. Okay, and Avalara has what we call a rooftop calculation capability. And when I say rooftop, it's really looking at not just the address and the zip code, but really drilling down into where that particular transaction is going to occur, right? Because when you go through a transaction, you need to know the ship to address, the ship from address, the amount of the actual invoice, the date that it was purchased. Those are all important pieces to know. But as one of my customers told me several years ago, is, look, I do a lot of business with the business that's right across the street from me. Literally, their doors faced each other, and it was in the same zip code. But because they were separated by the street, the tax applications to those transactions were much different than the tax applications to everyone else that they did business with on the opposite side of the street. And so just because you can see them, just because they have the same zip code, that doesn't necessarily mean that the engine is calculating appropriately. And so having a rooftop calculation is critical. At the same time, we see businesses that do a lot of business in rural locations, and they don't necessarily have an address that they can assign to it. Well, we also have lat-long capabilities that come standard out of the box to be able to apply the appropriate codes. In fact, oil and gas is one of those industries. And many years back, I had someone tell me that what they would do wherever that particular well site is, they would call the local post office or the local gas station, closest one that they could possibly find, and get the address for those locations and use that for taxability. Well, that's fine and dandy, right? But at the end of the day, that doesn't necessarily mean those are the same tax rates. And so having that or defining that nexus, where in the state, where in the country, where in the local jurisdiction, plus where it's being used and where it's being shipped from, is critical. Then it's going to take a look and it's going to consider the actual product taxability. What I mean by that is, how is the item that's being purchased going to be used, right? How does AvaTax need to consider what that product is so that way the appropriate tax treatment can be applied? In some cases, you have customers that might want a tax override. For an example, they're giving a promotional product away and they don't want the client to necessarily pay taxes on it. Well, at that point, there needs to be an override for the system to identify that so it can treat that and record it, right? And then we also have customers that quite often put bundles together, right? Like, think about it as a gift basket. Well, each one of those items has its own tax rates that are applied to it. So when you put a bundle together, what does that mean? AvaTax takes all those into consideration. And then it takes it a step further and it says, okay, great. We've defined taxability of the product. We've defined the nexus and what it's mean and how it's where it's going and what it's going to be used for. But is the customer taxable, right? Do we have an exemption certificate for them? If we do, does it apply to that particular state that they're going to be using the tool in or using the products in? Is the tax ID accurate? So on and so forth. But when that transaction occurs in that source system and you click on the button to calculate the tax and finalize the overall invoice, AvaTax is doing all of this behind the scenes, okay? And there's no latency whatsoever. It's in a matter of milliseconds. So if you think about that, it's less than a split second from when you click on that button, a tax result is going to be returned. You're not going to know any different. All you're going to know is that your process that you have in place today is exactly the same, and the tax that's been applied to it is as accurate as can possibly be. But more importantly, if you see up here on the right-hand side, everything's being recorded, and a report for audit purposes is being generated. So when we go back to the original question that Caitlin asked, and one of the questions that, or excuse me, that one of the answers that got the majority of the selection was kind of putting all the different source systems and all the technologies and all of that. This is a way that we can do this, right? So by having one overall tax engine that's tied to all the different source systems that are being utilized for those transactions, for those invoices, and then having that consolidated reporting functionality on the back end can help shed that light into not only solving from a tax perspective and understanding what that nexus is, understanding what that burden is that you're dealing with, and if the tax rates are accurate, but then it can also help from the standpoint of filing those returns, right? And then wrap that with exemption certificates. It can really kind of close the loop, if you will, into being able to automate this entire process. Now, one of the things I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up, one of the things that I think is just, and some of y'all may be familiar with this. Some of y'all may have never heard about this or may have heard about it, but aren't too terribly familiar. SST, or Streamlined Sales Tax. I think this is the coolest thing ever, okay? Let me kind of define what that is. So Streamlined Sales Tax is a group of participating states, as you can see here in the presentation, the ones that are in orange. Group of participating states have come in and said, look, if you have your tax calculated through AvaTax and you have Avalara filing those returns on your behalf, then the state can leverage what Avalara is doing to your benefit. What I mean by that is it pays Avalara to provide those functions for you. So those transactions that are going through those states, if you qualify, and those returns that Avalara is filing on your behalf are at zero cost to you as a company. Okay. Again, I want to reiterate that. Transactions and returns can be filed on your behalf at zero cost to you. Now, you still have to pay the taxes that are due to that state, right? But because those participating states have formed that partnership with Avalara, and we've done this streamlined sales tax approach, it allows us the ability to facilitate those processes for you at $0 to you, right? And that's huge. That's huge. Now, what I hear quite often is customers say, okay, well, how do I qualify for that? Right. So I'm doing business in some of these states, but how do I qualify? There's a couple things, but in particular, two that I wanted to point out. First is you can't own any property within that state that exceeds $50,000. Okay. And the second one, which comes up more often than not, especially in today's post COVID era, is you can't have any employees in the state that that cumulatively make more than $50,000. Now, the one thing to take note is just because you may disqualify yourself because of these restrictions in a handful of these states, but you're still doing business in others that you don't have those restrictions, doesn't mean you can't participate. So you can choose to participate in all the states that are available or none. But this is an amazing tool that you have to you that's provided to you for free. Provides you a little bit of audit help as well, right? If the state within the partnership in conjunction with Avalara has created this program, then they're doing it in essence, if you can imagine, to alleviate some of the internal costs that they have with auditors and going through all these different audits and knowing that what you're doing is going to be accurate and that it's going to be done timely, and so on and so forth. So this is a really cool tool. If y'all have any more questions, please don't hesitate to talk to your account manager and they'll be able to help you. Trick number 2, outsourcing. Okay. When we talk about, excuse me, one second. When we talk about outsourcing here, outsourcing can have a very negative perception as to what it is. What we're really talking about, and we've kind of, it's an internal term, but we've coined it managed services. Okay. What it's saying is, look, we know you guys are wearing a million different hats and are doing a ton of different things. And quite frankly, you're probably staying at work much later than you have to. Okay. But you might not have the budget. Again, going back to that original question, right, which is budget and resources. You might not have the budget to bring in the help that you need to alleviate some of these concerns or some of these burdens off of you. Okay, this is where we can step in and we can help. With Avalara's managed services, what we're really doing is saying, look, hire us to come on and act as your third party to facilitate some of these different things. So you don't have to hire someone, go through the process of hiring them and training them. You don't have to have the cost of benefits or healthcare. With the Avalara managed services, you can rest assured that we're handling that aspect for you without having to have a lot of those, what I always call hidden costs associated to that. And there's a couple different areas that we can provide those managed services, whether it be business licenses, which is another thing that I hear quite often from customers. It's not a concern until it becomes a concern, then it becomes a massive fire drill, right? But we can not only fill out everything that you may need to collect those business licenses, but also manage them and put them in a system that can, at that point, start automating processes for you, right? So whether those licenses are coming up for renewal, identifying it, sending notifications and allowing you to help. If business licenses are a thing that become a pain in the side on an annual basis, then let's have that conversation and your account managers can help. But we've talked about managed returns. And look, the nice thing about managed returns is when Avalara does this for you, not only are we collecting all of that data, we're filling out all the forms for you, and then we're filing those forms. We're also at that point remitting payment. So you take funds, you fund an account that's dedicated specifically for this activity, and we'll pay the states on your behalf and handle all that for you. At the same time, based on what it is that we're doing for you, we can also provide a first level of audit defense, where we collect the information in case of an audit and provide that to the auditor before they even come to you, right? And can assist. Exemption certificate management. I see this one constantly, whether it be, in fact, I was on the phone right before we started this webinar with a customer that said, I've got 80,000 certificates I need to store in a management system. And I said, no, you don't. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, there's no way you have 80,000 certificates. You probably have 40,000 certificates and 40,000 trash certificates. So why don't we go through and understand what are actually real and what's not, The ones that we still need a certificate for, let's put a campaign together with mail and email and phone call and go and collect those. And then let's verify it, right? Is the information they're providing accurate through their certificate? Do we need to confirm the tax ID? So those are all things that we can help facilitate there. We've got sales and use or VAT registration. If you know that you're coming up against a threshold and that you need to register within that state or within that country, we can assist. Item or product classifications, which is kind of tying that back into AvaTax, what that means and how we can help there as well. Property tax is a new one to us through some M&A activity. We've expanded our suite of products, and property tax is another avenue that we can come in and assist. But there's one I've left out here, and there's a particular reason. Custom tax research, right? When we talk about tax research, most people are kind of put into one of two boxes. The first box is, I don't need it. I've got Google. I go in there whenever I have a question. I type in a question. Google sends me all the answers that I need. I scour through the first couple pages, find the answers to my question, and then I'm good to go. Okay? That's fantastic. But when was that information updated? And is it truly accurate, right? The next thing that I hear quite often is, well, we have a tax research tool in place. Okay? Fantastic. Great. But what if that tax research tool doesn't provide you with the information that you need? I'll give you guys a good example. One of my customers is, let's just call them an insurance company. And they needed to understand, in particular for two states, Louisiana and Alaska, which are dealing with the locals. How are certain items being taxed when used with Medicare? And how are certain items being taxed when used with Medicare with the locals? That's information that they could not find in any tax research tool. So we put a team together that is going out and not only collecting that information, accurate information from the local jurisdictions and putting that together, but more importantly, maintaining that for them throughout the course of the next quarter, year, multiple years, so that they don't have to worry about it ever again. So when we talk about custom tax research, that's really what we're defining, right? What are those nuances in the business that are incredibly hard to find if you even start searching via Google, but if you do have a tax research tool, might not even be in there. We can help provide that information. Trick number 3. Oh, go ahead,
right.
Kate. Oh, I'm running up on time.
Really quickly, we are running out of time, so we're going to do this section just really quickly, like the next 3 to 5 minutes. We're going to go so we can answer some questions.
2 minutes. I'll get through it really quick. So that's what happens. You put me in front of the audience, Caitlin, and I can talk forever. Trick number 3. So bring things in-house, right? Well, that's kind of confusing. What does that mean? You just told me outsourcing, okay? Yes. But what I'm talking about is bringing your tax research in-house, okay? In particular, Avalara Tax Research is very simple, and it's very simple on multiple fronts. One is you can find everything that you need right on your dashboard, and it drills it down relevant to your industry, okay? And this is the part I wanted to spend a moment on. And then, Caitlin, I promise you, I'll give it to you. But if you drill down, let's say, for example, you're in the food industry and you're concerned about tax treatments in California for food preparation. This gives you exactly what you need to know. Yes, it is taxable in California if you're using a fryer, okay? And it provides you with a layman's terms explanation as to why. Now, it also gives you the authorities' legal terms as to why. But in most cases, what I've seen in my experience in doing this for as many years as I have, is that if you don't have a law degree, understanding those authority reasons, legal reasons, can be incredibly cumbersome and you might get it wrong. But Avalara Tax Research tells you exactly, yes or no, it is taxable, and in layman's terms, what that means to you. And if you need the legal reasons, they're right there on the side, okay? And then last but not least, y'all, which I think is really cool, you guys will be able to get this PowerPoint slide at the end. And with that, can sign up and get 2 free weeks of Avalara Tax Research and play around and find out for yourself. So, Caitlin, I told you I needed 2 minutes. I don't even think I used that much. The floor is yours.
I love it. Thank you so much. All right, this is our last TP poll question for the webinar. What topics would you like to hear in future webinars? Take a few seconds. This is our last CPE poll question. So if you missed one before, please be sure to fill out this one, and then your CPE certificates should be good to go if you haven't gotten them already. Again, once you reach that 60-minute mark and you get the questions answered, it's going to pop up in the icon right in that window. So I'm going to give everybody just a few more seconds, and maybe during this time while this is up, Raphael, we can answer some of the questions. And the first one I'm going to ask is from Nart. He says, I love how Avalara automates the sales tax collection and filing process in the US. Is there a same or similar process for sales in Europe? Does
Yes.
Avalara handle filings in the EU, because that still requires a lot of manual work?
So not only can we calculate for VAT, right, in Europe, but then we can also do e-reporting, electronic filing. All of that can be handled. We can address those 100%. And if you have further questions, please go to your account manager and they can help you out. But we are a global provider, and quite frankly, our e-invoicing tool is second to none. It's pretty phenomenal.
Awesome. And then I actually got a couple questions regarding deregistering from states. If you haven't been meeting the Nexus threshold for some time, knowing when or how to deregister, from my knowledge of just hearing a lot of customer stories, I know that a lot of people just stay registered in states and just file a $0 return. Have you, I'm getting a couple questions about this, so what would you say? And again, disclaimer, this is not legal advice, but what would you say, Raphael?
Yeah, we are not a legal provider. Yeah, I mean, look, that's what I hear from most of my clientele as well, right? Is that they're just going to file a $0 return, but they want to keep that registration. If you want to deregister, I don't know exactly what goes into that. Maybe your account manager might have a little bit more information. But most everyone I deal with just keeps that registration active in case it's needed and file that $0.
Awesome. And everybody, we're probably going to go about a minute or two over. I just want to make sure everybody kind of has as much time as they can if they're a minute or two late to the webinar. So I'll be here just a minute or two over.
Yeah, there was one. I'm sorry, there was one question that came up that I wanted to address, and I'm just kind of scrolling through the questionnaire now, but it was regarding use tax. And I'm trying to find it. I think it was Carlos that may have asked it, but how can tax be calculated for purchases versus invoices? Yes. So what we're doing in that particular instance, Carlos, and I'll give you a very high level view. And again, let's talk about it further with your account manager. But what we're doing with purchases is actually confirming that the tax that was applied to the invoice is correct, right? And then making a deciding factor of if it is accurate, perfect, then go ahead and pay it. If it's not, does it meet a certain threshold? And then as a business requirement, what do you want to do as a business? And if it doesn't meet that threshold, then do you want to go back to the customer and ask them to fix it or whatever the case is? But it's the same process. It's coming in, it's confirming that the tax that was applied to that particular purchase was accurate, and then creating business rules on how you want to handle that moving forward. I hope that helps.
Perfect. And I totally forgot to move to the question slide. So if you've been listening to us, we're answering some questions. Maybe the last one, Raphael, I don't know if there is one that you see in there in particular that you want to answer, but this one's kind of interesting regarding Canada from Shelley. So can Avalara handle multi-currency under one company? We were told Canada, we would have to set up a second company with Avalara. Our friendly neighbors up north, what do you think?
No, I don't know who might have told you that information, but I think that may be inaccurate. In fact, I know it's inaccurate. Yes, Avalara can handle multiple currencies, multiple countries. The majority of my clientele are not only in the US, but they're also doing business in Canada. And quite frankly, the majority of my clientele are also doing business in Europe. It's one overall system that's handling all of that aspect for them. Yeah, unless there's something that I don't know about your business, You do not need multiple systems to do that.
Perfect. Oh, and she said, to clarify, the tax is calculated, but they won't do the filing in Canada.
Again, I don't believe that to be true, because we file returns in Canada as well. Now, there may be some different nuances that I don't know about your business, and excuse me. But for the most part, we do file returns in Canada as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Shelly, for that great question. And thank you, everybody, so much for these really great questions. If you join us a minute late, or if you join us right on the dot, or if you were early, your CPE credit should now be available to download. So go to that Earn CPE certification box. You should see it now. Click on the icon, and then it'll open up in a new tab. And then we hope to see you in person. Raphael's going to be at Houston. So if you can join us at one of those cities, we'd love to host you. It's completely free. There is no cost attached. And we have support on site. I have go live and implementation on site. I have your account managers on site. So hope you'll join us for a really fun time. And again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Your CPE certificate will also be in your post-event email. If you have any questions, email us at customerevents@avalara.com. Again, that's customerevents@avalara.com. Raphael, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your expertise. We so appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, y'all. Thank you for listening to me. Sorry, I delayed us a little bit, but I hope it was worth it. And if I didn't get a chance to answer your question and you're in the Texas area, come to Houston. Let's sit down with a cup of coffee and I'll do my dangest.
I love it. I love it. All right, everybody. We'll see you all later. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.